Hey y'all! It is day 146 of spiritual healthcare. Welcome to everybody. It is good to see you guys. I know we had kind of a week off last week, but we're back and it's good to see everyone. I hope you guys had a awesome week. We had it's been a weird up and down weather week for Canada, that's for sure. It's 1 minute it's doing one thing, next minute it's doing another thing, so I don't know. Our weather's been all over the place. Good morning to everyone. It's nice to see you. It's, as I say, it's been busy here. There's been lots and lots and lots of projects on the go. But today we have some really, really cool things to talk about, including elementals, which is really, really fun. I've got a story about that. So thank you, Dan, for the question. Nice to see you. Good morning, Ed. As well as talking a little bit more about, we talked about the week prior in class 145. For those who have not seen class 145, I highly recommend later today going back and doing it, because we're going to elaborate a little bit more on psychokinesis and PK and questions that came up about last class. Which is just going to be cool. But if you didn't get last class, that's okay. It's still going to make sense to you guys. It's all good. Morning to Laura and Wes and everybody. Who did I miss? From Marge. Hey. Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys had a really, really good week. Because yeah, it's been so weird. I think weather-wise everywhere. Like I got off the phone yesterday with one of my favorite podcasts, Mysteries and Monsters, by Paul Bestel. And honestly, it is such a fun podcast to do. I've been on it, I think, 3 or 4 times now, and he's a blast. He's from the UK, and we just have a great time. And their weather has been weird as well, so everybody's been up and down, I think. But that should be out soon. And May the 8th, so this Saturday. I just posted the link to it like a little bit ago on the Facebook page. I'm going to be on ParaX Radio, and we're going to be doing a live session. We're going to be doing a live chat, and it's going to be super cool. It's really fun. It's Kat, who I've done shows with prior, and a new crew that she's got, and we're going to be doing this podcast. It's going to be really, really fun. So check out the link on the Entity Seeker Facebook page. It's in there. It's in the feed. I'll post it again closer to Saturday. Good morning to Sally. Good morning to Des. Good morning to everybody. It's so good to see everyone. So let's get cracking into today, because so lots and lots of questions came up from class 145, because we were talking about the Advances in Parapsychological Research 10th edition, which has blown my mind. So much of, so many questions, I think, that paranormal researchers had about residual energy and PK and quantum physics, and how we have a play in everything that we experience, has really come to a head with this book. And we explained a bunch of this in day 145. But the question that has come up since the last time was, how is it that that objects, when we see an object get thrown across the room, why is it that we can throw, like, say, if we could throw an object 3 feet versus 15 feet? So many times in haunted places and haunted locations, we see this phenomenon, right? You guys have probably had it happen, where you'll be sitting somewhere or doing an investigation or just hanging out in your house, and an object will seemingly just launch itself from one spot to another. And this can vary, right? Like I had a case about 15 years ago, and this is a funny story because it's just a funny story. My dear friend and business partner, Stephanie, she and I were at a location in Fort Edmonton Park called the Firkins House, and we were packing up all our stuff. It was right near the end of the night. We had an incredible night there, and we were packing up all our stuff, and we were joking with the crew that we had with us. I think it was CBC. It's always when you pack up all your stuff that something ends up happening, and then your cameras are long gone. And just as we finished saying this, a pair of the old tin can telephones, you know, with the rope, flew about 4 or 5 feet from the table that was sitting near the door and onto the floor. Nobody was touching it, just did its thing. So we've come to understand that in many of these cases, we're dealing with psychokinetic energy, PK, which is actually coming from the people in the space. Okay, so it's coming from people. And there's what they call a delay effect sometimes, where that person that's creating that energy could leave the place, and that object will still move because the energy's been stored up in that object. So the big question is, how is it that some of these objects move from one spot to another at various distances? What makes the difference? What causes that? And what they're beginning to understand, and the answer to this question is pretty cool, is something called, in physics, the decline effect. Okay, so basically what happens is that the closer something is to the source of the energy, the further that thing will go, essentially. Further that thing will go. So the analogy that I always like to use with this is, if you picture a tub of water, a big bathtub full of cold water, okay? And you want to warm the water up, and you turn on the tap, and the hot water comes pouring out of the tap. Now, right where that water is entering the cold water, it is hot, right? It's hot. And the further that hot water dissipates through the bathtub, the heat starts to dissipate, right? It starts to get colder and colder and colder and colder. So we got to think about PK kind of in the same way, where the closer something is, the more energy that it has. The neat thing about this explanation and what they're beginning to realize about PK is the fact that it also applies to our own emotional states and our own emotional center. The closer we are to joy and passion and the, you know, love and all of the things that is really who we are at our core, the more centered, the more power we have, the more connected we are to source energy, which is the same thing. It's the same thing. The more connected we are, you know, the more reach we have, the more opportunities open. And the further we are, we have that delay effect as well, right? The further we are, the further down the emotional scale that we are, the more separate we are from source, the less powerful we are. So the delay effect, or the decline effect, sorry, I think is such a great demonstration of so much. And I think it really, really, really is important to understand on, I think, a myriad of levels. But I mean, we hear all the time about this, you know, movements of objects and all of this type of thing. Shauna's saying, dang, she wish she could watch this. Don't worry, the class will be on entityseeker.ca, the replay, and on YouTube, youtube.com/entityseeker. So yeah, and it will be on Facebook. It's everywhere, really. So you'll be able to watch it. But that was really cool, and I thought that was a really, really brilliant question, because now the field itself has stopped wondering, okay, why are these things happening? We've stopped the question of, you know, like, oh, if they happen, I should say, if they happen, and we're now moving into this new phase of why does this happen, not if this happens. And this is, I think, a really, really big deal for the parapsychological community moving forward. It's a big, big deal. So I wanted to touch on that. Now, this I thought was such a great question that came in the other night, actually, from Dan, because I thought this was awesome. And we've got one from Brandy as well that we're going to be talking about next class. So Brandy, I will get to you. But I love this question because I actually wrote a segment about this in my book, Teaching the Living. And it's something I hear come up every once in a while, because this is a phenomenon that almost primarily happens in the prairie areas, which is kind of wild, kind of interesting. And I'm in the prairies right now, right? So the question is, I've heard many references to something called elementals. Is this something that you've run across in your research? So yeah, this is, it is. And first of all, I want to come back and sort of explain a little bit to everybody how elementals are kind of defined and what their thought of. And then I'm going to give you guys an example that it's a creepy example. So hold on to your clutch your pearls, y'all. So elementals go back about the time of the European Renaissance, okay? And it was in a 16th century work that the 4 elements of antiquity were kind of ironed out, and the categories of these elemental type things started to take shape. So things like gnomes, salamanders, sylphs, all of these different kind of creatures, these sort of spirit type creatures that existed in the world that were all sort of tied to these elements of antiquity, which were the 4 elements that we know of. Things like the pygmy, those types of sort of fairy tale creatures were all associated. And when we even look back into the First Nations cultures, we kind of see a bit of a crossover with that in creatures like the water babies in the Tule River, places like things like that. So we see this little crossover of these kind of fairy type, gnome type things. If you guys have ever seen, so there's an episode, if you guys have ever watched Monsters and Mysteries in America, and I think it's like the creepiest episode about, and it's called Evil Gnome, the Evil Gnome, and it's about this poor lady who lived near the Tule River who ended up in this battle with like essentially this gnome on her property, and it's like terrifying. It's on Daily Motion. If you guys get a chance to watch it, you're just gonna be like, what in the world is this? Super creepy. So anyway, each of these creatures were kind of tied to an element. So the gnome was representative of the earth. The Undine or Undine was a being of water. You had the Sylph, who was being of air, and the Salamander, which was representative of fire, right? So all of you Pokemon fans who wonder where Charmander came from, that's it right there. It's from Greek mythology, and the European mythology. So there's our basis for where this idea kind of formed. But people report these kind of creepy creatures that wander around properties that are kind of, spirit-esque. And probably the most famous case of this that I wanted to get into and touch on, which I think is probably one of the most memorable for me, because I think not only is it a great example of this, but it's also an example of why teaching the living works. So in Ireland, okay, we're going to travel all the way over to Ireland, and in this little county called Offaly, okay, it's little tiny county, there's a very infamous castle called Leap Castle, and it's spelled Leap, but it's pronounced Lep. So if you want to look it up later, that's what you're looking for. And it was built around about 1250. Okay, so late 15th century, maybe somewhere in there. They're not entirely sure. It was built upon some monolithic structures as well. So it's got like this crazy background to it. So it was built during a time period where there was a lot of wars going on, of course, and right up until the Irish Civil War, which was 1922. So there's a lot of war going on and whatever. And one of the families that ended up rooted in this castle was a family called the O'Carroll family. And the O'Carroll family had basically they had a chapel in the castle, and it became known as the Bloody Chapel. And the reason why was because two of the O'Carroll brothers ended up at odds with each other. They ended up in war, and the one brother ended up showing up at the little temple in the castle while his brother was actually doing mass, and he came up the stairs and he killed him, and it was awful. So off of the Bloody Chapel there was a pit, this long pit, and these pits were put in castles at the time period all over the place, and they were called oubliettes, or known as the little place of forgetting. And these long, narrow pits had a great big spike at the bottom, and anybody that the family decided that they did not like would get pushed into these pits, and they would hopefully fall and die on the spike, but if you didn't, you were just stuck down there. And you just died. So when the castle was actually brought like, I guess, started to get refurbished. And I believe it was the Darby family that ended up coming out and wanting to, you know, do something with this castle. They were shoveling out cartloads of bones, okay? And it was pretty creepy. So the Darby family, when they moved in after the O'Carrolls, they moved in a time period where seances and the occult and all of that was really getting going. It was really picking up, and people thought it was just, you know, it was cool. It was a good thing to do, and whatever. So we're talking like 1900s and whatever, and even earlier than that. It was I believe it passed in marriage to the Darbys, and I think it was 1659. So it was a long time. So anyway, they ended up clearing this all out, and Mildred Darby ended up writing an account to, it was either a journal or a paper or something like that, where she has reported the event of seeing what she thought was an elemental. Okay, so she was standing on the what they called the spiral staircase. Okay, and the spiral staircase in Let Castle is where this thing is often seen. It just seems to hang around there. And she was hanging out on the balcony, sort of overlooking the main hall, and she turned around because she smelled something horrific. It was so bad, and it smelled like just rotting meat. It was gross. And she turned around, and what she saw was this thing about the size of a sheep, and it was looking up at her, and she said it was just terrifying. Its face was all rotted. It was disgusting, and she was terrified. It had kind of like these sort of hoof claw-like hands. It was not human. It was terrible. This was actually documented in a TV show series that came out called Castle Ghosts. And if you guys can find Castle Ghosts of Ireland, I believe it's on Daily Motion. You'll be able to see this reenacted, and it's really, really well done. So she and the Darbys ended up living with this elemental, or what they figured was this elemental, for ages, right? Until the family, the Ryans, a musician by the name of Sean Ryan, took over in 1991, and he wanted to rebuild the castle because the castle itself had been a complete mess. It's been burned out a number of times. It's been attacked during, as I say, the Irish Civil War. Crazy. I mean, this place was a disaster. So when the Ryans moved in, they were moving in with their kids, and I mean, they had no knowledge of what was going on. And when they started to experience this stuff, the entity, which I'll get into what I think it was in a minute, the entity was just pissed because its space was being invaded. Its territory was being disrupted, and it got really, really angry and really aggressive and very violent with Sean, because Sean was trying to restructure this castle, right? So as he was working, there was a number of injuries. At one point, the elemental pushed him off his ladder. He ended up shattering his knee. He ended up, it was crazy. But here's where it gets brilliant. And I'm such a fan of these people because of how they handled it. What they realized was that so much of what was going on was built because of the energy that had been established in this place. So this entity had been birthed from the negativity that had been going on in the area, right? In the Bloody Chapel, this was a war-torn castle. And what they decided to do was, instead of going to battle with this thing that they, half the time couldn't see, what they decided to do was to begin to shift their emotional center and shift the energy in the space. So when they had their child, when their child was born, their next kiddo, what they did was they held the ceremony, the baptism ceremony, in the Bloody Chapel. They lit candles, they had fun, it was laughter and it was joy, and they had a blast. And what was interesting was that even though the day was actually quite breezy, there was a lot of wind that was coming in, because these castles, they don't really have windows per se in a lot of these towers. The candles never went out. And so they changed, they started to shift the energy, and they began to realize that if they did not put their focus and attention on what was going on with this thing, they never had a problem. So now you can actually go visit Lep Castle, and their only request, the Ryans' only request, is that you don't give attention to the entity that's there. They say you can do whatever you want, just don't give it attention, because as soon as you give it attention, then stuff starts to pick back up, because where your focus goes, energy flows. And they started to understand that. So now they have renovated the castle. It looks amazing. It's open to the public via appointment, and you can go hang out there, and it's really, really cool. It's also an incredible location to visit, to experience residual energy, because they have had full scenes erupt in front of people. It's really incredible. They had one specific one where it was, I believe it was 2 soldiers actually killing somebody. Of course, not conscious. It's all image and, you know, recording in the environment. But it's pretty phenomenal stuff. Like, this place is on another level. So here's my take on elementals. There's also, by the way, if any of you guys have my book, Teaching the Living, there's a segment on Lep Castle in here as well, just for that reason. But so here's the cool thing about what I think has gone on here, because I think a lot of these energies, especially things like this in Lep Castle, even though they are classified in these different areas, because every culture has a name for everything, whether it be elemental, whether it be, say, the water babies, the gnomes, because I'm sure a lot of people, you know, had seen, if they had seen the elemental under the right context, you know, you could have classified that as a gnome, right? It's like this short, sort of gross little thing that's, you know, running around, that's like 3 feet tall, you know, but you put that into another culture, maybe stick that by the Tule River, and all of a sudden, oh no, it's water baby, or, you know, it's something else. In some of the cultures here, some of the traditions, the Wendigo is actually seen as something that is short, and like it's similar to that as well. So depending on where you go, right? Where you go, what culture you're in, everybody's kind of got this different name for it. I try to look at it a little more broadly. You know, we can't really necessarily point at something like that and say this is what it is, because we just don't have that data. We don't have that information. But we can start to look at behaviors of an entity like this, and then begin to look at where else those behaviors show up in different cases. And I see a lot of parallels with this guy and the case in Greyfriars Kirkyard, also in the UK, and a number of cases that I've investigated also, because Dan was asking, have you experienced anything like this? The answer is yes. Would I have turned around and pointed at it and said it was an elemental? No, I would have probably classified it differently. But ultimately, it's the same thing. It's the same phenomenon, so it doesn't really matter what the label is. And typically, these entities they tend to be very protective, very aggressive over property, and they usually seem to be birthed from a lot of focused negative energy. Okay, so they're not people. There's something else. And they seem to be a case of the thoughts become the thinker, right? The thought can generate consciousness. We've talked before about the Philip experiment in Ontario, where they were actually able to generate an entity that was thinking and responding and whatever, and it was all based on people's focus. And this seems to be the same case in these situations, where a lot of negative focus, a lot of negative emotion seems to birth a consciousness. So with these situations, that seems to be what it is. And that's how I view the elemental, at least from Lep Castle. Needless to say, not all of these things are negative, but in this particular case, he's not the friendliest thing in the world. And, you know, but very, very protective over property. And these ones tend to be the ones that, if they're going to get violent, or if there's going to be violence, they are usually the ones to start it. You know, they're usually the ones to sort of strike out, because they seem, the more you interact with them, they seem very animalistic. They're very, very animalistic. So They tend to get in fights with other animals in houses. I had a friend of mine who had one in his house, and he and his dog, this thing and his dog, got into it in the kitchen the one day, and they were fighting and biting, and it was crazy. It was crazy. So his dog was like fighting with nothing in midair, but they were getting into it because it's a territory problem. So it's interesting to watch sort of what goes on, and as I say, they tend to be very primitive, and it's just one of those phenomenon that happens, and it's interesting. But I highly recommend going to check out Leap Castle. Research that today. As I say, Robert Hardy, and I'm gonna actually, you know what? I'm gonna see if I can find the episode for you guys, and then I'm gonna post it on the Entity Seeker Facebook page so you can watch it. There is, as I say, Robert Hardy did a fantastic series of documentaries called Castle Ghosts, and this one was featured in Castle Ghosts of Ireland. And this particular case is one of the cases that really inspired me to start looking into this type of phenomenon and what is it, why does this happen, and what changed, what made this environment suddenly shift so that it went from this, war-torn, very dangerous place to be, to this really peaceful place to raise a family. And that dynamic to me was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating, because when this documentary came out, because this was in the 90s, okay, so a lot of the stuff that we know now about self-work and all of that just wasn't really there, right? It wasn't really out there for the public. And to me, this was the coolest thing, because it was like, well, wait a minute, you can change how you are, and then the environment will change. What is that? What are these things responding to? And I think Leap Castle was so brilliant. And it's described by a lot of people, a lot of investigators, as the world's most haunted castle. There's another apparition that is seen around Leap called the Red Lady. Again, residual energy. It walks the halls, that she holding a dagger, just wandering the halls. So again, we've got another example of residual energy. There's apparition of two girls, little girls, who they believe were two girls named Charlotte and Emily. And Emily, I believe, she died after she fell from the battlements on the top of the castle. So that was pretty crazy. So anyway, so they're heard running up and down the spiral staircase. So again, we've got residual energy. And it was so really, really neat. But the conscious one seems to be this entity, this elemental entity. It's pretty neat. So I wanted to give you guys a bit of that today, because as I thought the question was super cool. And I want to read you Mildred Darby's account of what she saw. So this is the article that she wrote and sent in talking about the elemental, and it's in Teaching the Living. So this is what she said. So this came out in the Occult Review in 1909, okay? She said, I was standing in the galley, looking down at the main floor, when I felt somebody put a hand on my shoulder. The thing was about the size of a sheep, thin, gaunting, and shadowy. Its face was human, but to be more accurate, inhuman. Its lust in its eyes, which seemed half decomposed in thick black cavities, stared into mine. The horrible smell, 100 times intensified, came up to my face, giving me a deadly nausea. It was the smell of a decomposing corpse. So that's stuck with a lot of people. That's stuck with a lot of people. 1909, you're not used to picking up really anything, even the Occult Review, and reading something like that. It's pretty cool. So I will find that episode for you guys, and I'll post it. I'll throw it on the Entity Seeker Facebook page, so you guys can see it, because I think it's gonna blow your mind. It's so cool, and it's so cool to see this castle, because the castle itself looks like it's terrifying looking. It's exactly how you think it looks. It looks like it's out of like Mordor or something like that. It's crazy. So that being said, y'all, I'm going to leave you with all of that. And you guys can go and check out those episodes. Once I get them up there, I'll do it right after this. So you guys can see them. And, in the meantime, can't let you all go without some affirmations and to get ourselves in the right energy so that we get to create what we want. And hopefully no elementals, you know. we don't want at least that kind. We don't want that kind. All right. So everybody take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize and am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to my connection as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even in a sea of uncertainty. And in this moment, all is well. Breathe, everybody. I'm able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance of the life around me. I am able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find peace, the soothing silence of my inner being. Everybody breathe. Shake it out, everybody. Shake it out. Shake it out. Thank you all for this morning. I hope it was super interesting. I love this story. I love this case. It's just super cool. And we've got so much coming up, so much to talk about next week. Lots of questions that have come through, which have been brilliant, including one from Brandy, which we're going to talk about next week. And she came across something called the Law of One. And there's some UFO connection with it. There's a whole bunch of things we're going to talk about next week. So thank you all for being here. You know, share it up, share everything up. All the classes can be found, of course, entityseeker.ca, as well as youtube.com/entityseeker. So go and subscribe to that, because then you'll get all the videos. There's not just spiritual healthcare. There's tons of stuff on there. Like all my interviews go up there, live shows, all of, like, everything goes there. So thank you, everyone. Can't do this without you. Please keep sending in your questions, and I will see you all next Wednesday, barring something weird happening. So bye, everyone. See you later.